Tonight,
we need them to provide at least $100 billion in emergency rental assistance.
A new move from the CDC to help prevent evictions in the middle of the pandemic. Plus, Democratic nominee Joe Biden attacks the administration's push to reopen schools without the proper precautions. And why China is targeting religious minorities and forcing them into mass prison detentions. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Tonight, relief for Americans facing eviction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jenna Browder.
Good evening, and I'm John Jessup. Tonight, millions of renters across the nation can breathe a sigh of relief, at least for now. Under a White House executive order, the CDC has placed a nationwide moratorium on coronavirus-related evictions through the end of the year.
But some are calling it a half solution. CBN's Eric Phillips has been following the story. Eric, this move seems to have come at a pretty pivotal time.
Well, that's right, Jenna and John. To put it bluntly, the country was on the brink of an eviction tidal wave. Now with this move by the CDC, it keeps people in their homes for now, but it does not address the financial need.
Like so many others, 65-year-old Victoria Lambert lost her job when the pandemic hit. She receives Social Security, but it's not enough to pay the rent on the Philadelphia studio apartment where she and her son live.
But you get to a point in your life where you really don't want to have to keep asking people for that. What kind of woman am I? You know, can't even take care of my own family. Can't even take care of my own family, and it's only two of us.
2 of more than 30 million that were at risk as the safety net of COVID eviction moratoriums expired and courts reopened. But that was put on hold when, under a White House executive order, the CDC placed a nationwide moratorium on evictions caused by COVID-related job loss until the end of the year.
Housing is healthcare, and we will not be able to truly contain this pandemic if millions more people are becoming homeless.
Housing advocate Diane Yentell sees the CDC's move as a major step in the right direction, although she feels it's short of what really needs to happen.
What we most need the federal government to do is to implement a uniform moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent for the duration of the pandemic. We need them to provide at least $100 billion in emergency rental assistance to keep those low-income renters stably housed. And we need at least $11 billion in funds for homeless shelter and service providers to keep people who are homeless safe and get them housed as quickly as possible.
Most pressing, the moratorium, which will keep tenants in their homes, has no mechanism for landlords to receive necessary payments.
We also don't want small business people who own most of the apartment buildings and single-family rentals in the country to go out of business. Because I also don't think we want a country where our rental property is all owned by hedge funds.
Yentell and Dworkin agree. A moratorium without any government assistance creates a financial cliff for renters and landlords, since they're getting no money now, plus people won't be able to pay rent owed when the moratorium ends. That solution needs to come from Congress, something Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has underscored on Capitol Hill.
We did have bipartisan agreement about putting more money for rental assistance. Again, we may be differ on the amount. I would encourage both the House and the Senate. There are areas that we have overlap in agreement. Let's move forward for the basis of the American people and American workers and kids. Things that we can agree on, let's pass quickly.
Bottom line, the moratorium is a welcomed reprieve for people like Lambert, but the worry is not over.
You know, like a storm. Okay, the storm has got to end, right? We know that a snowstorm is it's got to stop snowing. It can't snow 365 days. So, okay, we know that. But we don't have a clue about when this is going to end.
And it's worth mentioning that this moratorium passed by the CDC is farther reaching than the one passed by Congress back in March as part of the CARES Act. That one applied to rental properties that were backed by federal loans. This one applies to all rental properties, irrespective of how they receive their funding, John and Jenna.
So, Eric, how does the CDC have the power to stop evictions?
A good question. A lot of people have been kind of wondering that. Well, the CDC has the authority under an act that was passed back in 1944 called the Public Health Services Act. And that gives the government broad powers to do whatever it needs to do to try to stem the spread of communicable diseases. So the idea is that if, in fact, you kick people out of their homes and they're either on the street, in crowded shelters, or in crowded living situations with family members, you're likely putting them in a situation for them to get sick and for others to as well.
All right, good information. CBN's Eric Phillips. Thanks, Eric. Well, meanwhile, on the campaign trail today, Biden slamming President Trump for his response to the pandemic. Jenna, I believe you have the rest of the story.
And how he would reopen schools. A lot of criticism there. This all coming as the number of Americans who have tested positive for the virus reaches more than 6 million. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us with more on Biden's cutting comments today. Ben?
Well, Jenna, Biden sees reopening schools safely as, quote, a national emergency. Today, he spoke directly to the president, telling him, quite frankly, to get off Twitter and do more for the public.
Our children are paying the price for his failures.
From his Delaware home, the former vice president tore into Trump's handling of COVID-19, saying the commander-in-chief ignored science and failed to curb the spread of the virus.
If President Trump and his administration had done their jobs early on with this crisis, American schools would be open, and they'd be open safely. Instead, American families all across this country are paying the price for his failures.
Biden was joined by his wife, Jill.
Jill's an educator, and she'll be the first one to tell you that this should be a season of promise for our country. Times when classrooms are crackling with the possibilities of the new year, students' hopes, and all about the future.
Biden says he's now working with experts to put together a plan to reopen schools safely. If elected, he would direct FEMA to give kids full access to disaster relief, ensure teachers and staff have proper sanitation supplies, and work with Congress to pass emergency packages for schools.
Protecting our students, our educators, our communities, getting our schools open safely and effectively. This is a national emergency. But President Trump still doesn't have any real plan for how to open our schools safely. No real plan.
Trump pushed back on Biden, calling him a low-energy candidate, tweeting that he's back in his basement now, no schedule. Trump also blames Democratic governors for keeping their states closed to hurt him in November. Now, today was also the first time Biden took questions from the press. Grinnell College National just released a new poll showing Biden ahead of Trump 49% to 41%. Other polls show very similar margins with just 61 days left until the election. John, Jenna?
All right, thanks, Ben. Well, the stage is set for the 2020 presidential debates now that the moderators have been named. Fox's Chris Wallace will host the first presidential debate September 29th. The second debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump takes place October 15th, with Steve Scully of C-SPAN moderating a town hall-style forum featuring audience questions. And NBC's Kristen Welker moderates the third and final debate on October 22nd. USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page will moderate the one and only vice presidential debate on October 7th. The Trump campaign decried the named moderator, saying, quote, some can be identified as clear opponents of President Trump, meaning Joe Biden will actually have a teammate on stage. We'll be back right after this.
Having sex before you marry is a bad idea. Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
Watch Dan and Dale tackle trending topics that test your faith on the next Faith Wire, Monday night at 9:30. The Global Lane takes you around the world, providing facts over fiction.
What might rising trade and geopolitical tensions mean for you on the home front?
With over 45 years of experience, award-winning journalist Gary Lane brings you the truth from a global angle.
What about the issue of immigration?
World news analysis you won't see anywhere else.
And it's all right here on the Global Lane.
Watch The Global Lane, Thursday night at 9:30.
Welcome back. A committee formed by D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser is calling for action against monuments they say represents a history of racism and oppression. Their initial report included the Washington Monument and the Jefferson Memorial, which are on federal properties. Among the dozens of other historical figures are Presidents James Monroe and Andrew Jackson, as well as Benjamin Franklin and national anthem composer Francis Scott Key. Mayor Bowser said the commission's task is to identify statues and memorials that are, quote, inconsistent with D.C. values. The criteria included questions like, did the historical figures participate in slavery, support oppression, support supremacist agenda or systemic racism, or violate current D.C. human rights laws? The pushback came swiftly. In a statement, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany accused the, quote, radically liberal mayor of repeating the same left-wing narrative used to incite dangerous riots and destroy our heritage. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton tweeted video of Black Lives Matter protesters harassing diners at a D.C. restaurant, calling on the mayor to focus on protecting citizens and not removing monuments. In another tweet, Senator Cotton pointed out that the monuments are on federal property and that the district can't touch them. Interior Secretary David Bernhardt retweeted the mayor's announcement with the message, "Not on my watch, never gonna happen." Well, following the outcry, a Bowser spokesperson said the mayor asked the commission to clarify and refine their recommendations to just focus on local D.C.
Well, at the same time, the debate over whether D.C. should be its own state rages on. Advocates say it's a matter of securing voting rights for taxpayers in the nation's capital. But as Jennifer Wishon explains, the debate is getting bogged down by the question of who gets control of Congress.
Each year, tens of millions of tourists flock here to Washington, D.C. from every corner of the globe. It's a one-of-a-kind place designed specifically and carefully laid out in the Constitution.
The framers wanted to have the seat of the new federal government independent of any given state.
Roger Pilon with the Cato Institute has twice testified before Congress about the implications of granting statehood to D.C.
They didn't want any given state to be disproportionately influential on the new government.
Neutral ground to conduct the people's business. And for people living in the district, Congress would serve as their local government. Today, the push from many of the 700,000 residents can be seen in the streets through the revolutionary slogan, "Taxation without representation." Since they pay federal taxes, residents want the right to elect their own representatives to Congress. Making the district a state has been debated for decades, and last month, the Democratic-controlled House approved it.
The District of Columbia Statehood Bill, H.R. 51, is passed.
Every Republican and one Democrat voted no. The bill takes the 10 square miles of Washington, D.C. as specified in the Constitution and reduces it to an enclave around the National Mall that would remain under congressional control. What's left would become the 51st state, called the Washington Douglas Commonwealth, a nod to both George Washington and Frederick Douglass. The measure is dead on arrival, at least for now, given the Republican-controlled Senate. President Trump also opposes it. Since the majority of D.C. residents are black, Speaker Pelosi and Democratic leaders saw now as an opportunistic time to champion the issue.
You might be wondering why D.C. is not yet a state, and it's actually a pretty easy one to answer. It is racism.
But opponents say the push for statehood is simply about political gain.
This proposal is plainly nothing but a Democratic power grab.
If representation is what residents want, they could push to return parts of the district to Maryland, which ceded the land to create the district in the first place. But here's the rub. That solution wouldn't allow for the addition of 2 new senators.
Our cause for statehood is certainly about making sure we have 2 voting senators to speak up for us and making sure that our congresswoman has a vote.
And since D.C. voted for the Democratic nominee by 80% or more in the last 5 presidential contests, statehood would virtually guarantee 2 new Democratic senators.
This is not about enfranchising people. This is about expanding the Senate map to accommodate the most radical agenda that I've ever seen since I've been up here, getting more radical by the day. There's nothing these people won't do to change the face of the country, and we're tired of it. We're going to fight back.
Under the House plan, the federal government would become dependent on this 51st state for essentials like utilities, snow removal, and fire services. Pilon says recent Black Lives Matter demonstrations reveal how a D.C. state could possibly wreak havoc.
One can imagine scenarios that would be quite uncomfortable. For example, if you had the District of Columbia with its own state government, entirely Democratic, and you had a president who was Republican in the White House, you could imagine the temptation to, for example, withhold services.
If the Senate and White House flip to Democratic control, the measure will likely pass as Joe Biden supports it. Pilon argues it would then wind up in court because Congress simply doesn't have the authority to make D.C. a state through legislation.
Every Justice Department that has looked at this issue from the time when Robert Kennedy was an Attorney General in 1963 has said that Congress has no power to do what is contemplated in this bill.
That means a new amendment to the Constitution, which requires ratification by 3/4 of the states. The latest attempt came in 1978 when Democrats led Congress and Jimmy Carter was here at the White House. They passed a constitutional amendment aimed at giving D.C. voting representation in Congress. But at the end of the 7-year deadline, only 16 states had ratified it. Fast forward to 2020, and the most recent polling shows 64% of Americans still oppose adding D.C. as a state. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, the White House.
Thanks, Jennifer. Meanwhile, another story we're following here in Washington tonight. The White House is urging Congress to pass a bipartisan relief package. You may recall back in August, weeks of negotiations stalled out. Based on a statement today from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, it doesn't look like things will go much further. After speaking with Secretary Steven Mnuchin, Pelosi said, quote, "Sadly, this phone call made clear that Democrats and the White House continue to have serious differences understanding the gravity of the situation that America's working families are facing."
Religious minorities living in fear. Up next, how the Chinese government is ramping up discrimination.
On the home front.
Thanks for joining us for CBN's On the Home Front, where we highlight what the men and women of America's military do to defend our country. CBN honors the men and women in our military with an initiative called Helping the Home Front. It partners with churches across the country to meet the needs of their military families, from repairing homes to wiping out medical bills for wounded veterans.
On the Home Front, Tuesday morning at 10:30.
If you want to be an attorney with a passion for serving people and for excellence, Regent University needs to be high on your list.
Regent's award-winning law school doesn't just create lawyers. We create leaders, judges, prosecutors and defense lawyers, civil litigators, and leaders in government.
My focus has been trying to really make sure we have the future leaders we need for the bench and the bar and for society generally.
You'll learn from highly credentialed leaders who are current and former judges, distinguished scholars, and ACLJ counsel.
I'm so glad I chose Regent. The relationships here have been amazing. The faculty have been amazing. Not everybody's called to the same thing when they leave law school, but they're called by a God who has a purpose for their lives, and He is going to use that education to make a difference in the world.
Regent will prepare you to be a purpose-driven, practice-ready lawyer. To start your rewarding law career, complete the online application, submit your transcripts, and take the law school admissions test by July. Apply today.
Back. China is building scores of jails and internment camps to prison millions of minority Muslims in what's being described as the largest-scale detention of ethnic and religious minorities since World War II.
According to a BuzzFeed investigation, police have almost every person in one province that's home to a majority of Uyghur Muslims under perpetual surveillance, using high-tech technology for heavy-handed policing. Our George Thomas spoke with a Uyghur American who's on the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom.
Mr. Turkel, thank you so much for coming on the show. Since 2017, Chinese authorities have reportedly built some 270 camps in Xinjiang province to hold Uyghur Muslims and other minorities. Can you describe, sir, what are these facilities and what's going on inside them?
The Chinese government calls them re-education camps, training camps, or training facility centers, but these are concentration camps that shares the hallmarks or commonalities with the one that we've seen in history. Typically, it's extrajudicial, and also they round up people based on their religion and ethnicity. They hold these individuals in these facilities to force them to go through atheist education, indoctrination, and learning Chinese Communist Party chief Xi Jinping thoughts.
The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights says about 500,000 Uyghur Muslims who used to live in Xinjiang province are missing. Where are they?
Some of the most jarring, the most jarring aspect of the Chinese crimes committed against Uyghur people involves Uyghur children. There are about 500,000 Uyghur children have been taken away from their parents and sent to state-run orphanages. Recently, one of the fathers who were looking for his kids recognized his child on his Chinese state-run propaganda video.
China, sir, says that the mass surveillance and government-run internment facilities are part of a war on terror aimed at tackling extremism. Do you buy their argument?
The fact that the Chinese says something 3 times does not make it true. It shows how belligerent, how aggressive, how shameless to the extent that they're trying to justify their crimes committed against Uyghur people. This is a modern-day genocide. This is a modern-day concentration camps.
What's the goal with this campaign?
As Vice President Mike Pence said in October 2018, Chinese government has very specific unstated goal, which is to stamp out the Uyghur identity and dilute this centuries-old or destroy this centuries-old ethno-national tradition, way of life, and religion. So the Chinese government can use different excuses, but this is all about their intention to destroy this proud nation.
And when you talk about the Uyghur people, are they trying to replace them by the majority Han Chinese population?
To the Chinese government, to the Chinese individuals, especially those Chinese elites, the Uyghur people being different is not acceptable. Therefore, they have to go through social engineering, human re-engineering to become part of China proper. If you stand in the way, that they take you out. So to the Chinese government, as the Chinese ambassador here in Washington said, these programs are part of their efforts to transform, quote unquote, Uyghurs into normal human beings. So the Chinese government in 2020 and 21st century decides which human being is normal and which are the ones are not normal.
And in the eyes of the Chinese government in Beijing, Uyghur Muslims are not normal? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what the Xi Jinping, the Chinese ambassador to Washington, told Reuters in late 2018, that his government is helping the Uyghurs to transform into a normal human being. And I need to highlight this. In the face of these kind of naked, aggressive, obscene attacks on the Uyghur religious identity, much of the Muslim world has been staying silent.
Okay, Mr. Turkel, thank you so much for coming on the show and putting a spotlight on this very, very important topic.
Thank you very much for having me on.
You're welcome.
Important topic indeed. Thanks, George. Well, coming up, a preemie with a powerful story of survival that involves a dedicated doctor determined to keep hope alive. The touching story when we come back.
If you want to be an attorney with a passion for serving people and for excellence, Regent University needs to be high on your list.
Regent's award-winning law school doesn't just create lawyers. We create leaders, judges, prosecutors and defense lawyers, civil litigators, and leaders in government. Ready to become a purpose-driven, practice-ready lawyer? To start your rewarding career, complete the online application, submit your transcripts, and take the law school admissions test by July.
Nutrition, exercise, essential oils, weight loss, and more. It's Healthy Living with Lori Johnson.
Talk about what's in this.
Join CBN health reporter Lori Johnson to get the latest information from today's top health experts.
This is fantastic.
Find out what you need to know to live a healthier life. Watch Healthy Living, Tuesday night at 9:30.
Superbook fans, here's something else you'll love. It's the new Superbook Bible app. It's packed with games, activities, and Superbook episodes that you can watch for free. Oh no! There's trivia, a fun daily devotional, and answers to your Bible questions. Plus, an easy-to-understand Bible the whole family will enjoy. You can even create your own Superbook character. Ta-da! Whoa!
Millsburg Falls man, come.
Sorry, pardon me. Sorry, excuse me. Ouch!
Are you getting this?
Earn super points to win daily prizes too, and so much more. Time to get back to my adventures. See you soon. It's the new Superbook Bible app. Free downloads on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon.
Finally tonight, a miracle baby alive today because of a hero doctor.
That's right. New York emergency physician John Matthew kept 1 pound, 9 ounce Michaela alive for 90 minutes at a hospital that didn't even have a neonatal unit.
It wasn't until Michaela was stable enough that the neonatologist sat down and talked to us and explained how what Dr. Matthew did that day is something that they would have never even done themselves.
Born unexpectedly 16 weeks early, Dr. Matthew worked overtime to keep Michaela alive without damaging her lungs until she was stable enough to be transferred to a hospital with a NICU. The now 9-pound healthy baby recently shared a sweet reunion with the doctor who saved her life.
Yeah, hero indeed, and so many people on the front lines, the medical field.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for watching Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.